of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, it's kind of a theme of this whole talk, is dealing with why that Hood was here so long. Why was he here 23 days? Because I'm pretty sure that he didn't intend to be here for 23 days. But there were things that slowed him down that kept him from being able to take off across the river and head north at a rapid pace like he probably thought he was going to do. Now, how many of you even familiar with Hood being here? Okay, anybody not familiar with Hood being here? All right, so I don't have to explain who Hood is then. All right. One of the things that we find is the conditions of the Muscle Shoals in October of 1864. And one of the gentlemen, Thomas Key, who had been a local newspaper man here, he had moved out of here. He went to Arkansas. He went to Kansas. He was up there, did some work up there in the newspapers right at the time when all this bloody Kansas and all this stuff was going on. He ends up coming back here during the war. He says, as I passed down the valley of the Tennessee, I saw nothing but the wrecks of palaces and devastated plantations. He wrote in his diary, I visited the business part of Tuscumbia and found a large portion of the town burned and all the streets looking weather-worn and dilapidated, said Key, who had previously owned a newspaper in the city. He blamed this fiendish handiwork on the federal General Dodge, the same General Dodge who had unleashed Strait's unfortunate raid against Rome, and contended himself with imagining the fiery torments that justice will heap upon his guilty soul. Now, another gentleman that spoke about this was writing a letter to his wife. He says, Dear Sally, this must have been indeed a delightful country before the war, but the ruthless invader has desolated it like a besom of destruction. Nearly every residence on our march yesterday and today has been burned by the enemy, and plantations rich as far as the eye can reach are lying waste. I have never seen such destruction. What few people are left are females, and all are dressed in deep mourning. There is certainly a day of retribution in store for the Hessians. William H. Hardy. So these are coming down through there, and they're over in the Tuscumbia area, Leeton, Cortland, on back that direction. They're seeing these plantations that were burned. He mentions Dodge. Dodge was here, and he is pretty much given Sherman his ideas for what he's going to do later on. But he comes through here, and he has one gentleman by the name of Cornyn who does a lot of this burning, and who had been in Kansas. He's got a Kansas regiment with him, a cavalry regiment, and they were used to this type of thing, and they wanted to devastate it. They wanted to make sure that nothing was done that was left. Matter of fact, as Gregg has told me, he had read one spot where they said that you only burn the things that's got corn in it. If it's got corn in there, burn it. So they'd take the corn and throw it inside the door and burn it because it had corn in there. Am I right? So then, this was the result of these various events of 1862 and 1863. So they have been in Decatur, and they've left Decatur, and they're coming this direction. And across the river is General Croxton's brigade of the 1st Tennessee, 8th Iowa, 4th Kentucky Mounted, and the 2nd Michigan Regiment of Cavalry. And this, of course, is John T. Croxton. So then he has his troops watching the river at Lamb's Ferry, just south of between Elgin and Center Star, and down at Bainbridge. And then he has some others that were given to him, the 10th and 12th Tennessee Cavalry, that he wasn't real fond of them. And they were watching the Cheatham Ferry, the Garner's Ferry, and the Pride's Ferry down in the bend of the river. And so that's what they're doing at the time that Hood is coming through here. Thomas, Croxton says that Thomas sent him the 10th and 12th Tennessee, and Croxton wrote these things. He said only about 450 men reported, and these were so badly mounted and so carelessly managed that before the date mentioned, they reported less than 200 effective men. These were stationed at Martin's Mills, where you'll see in the picture there at the top there. Martin's Mills is if you can see where it's lined in, it looks green on the inside. That's where that was the property for the mills. And he says that they were 3 miles west of Florence on the Waterloo Road and charged with watching Pride's, Garner's, and Cheatham's ferries. So on the October the 29th, Croxton writes, on the evening of the 29th of October, I obtained reliable information that Hood's entire army was at Town Creek and would probably attempt to lay a pontoon bridge at Bainbridge during that night. I at once dispatched this information to General Thomas and sent the 2nd Michigan Cavalry to reinforce the guard at Bainbridge, a battalion to Raccoon Branch, 2 miles above Florence, and ordered the 10th and 12th Tennessee from Martin's Mills to watch the ferry at Florence. So that's who was at Florence. Stephen D. Lee, he is also going to receive some orders. He said, my corps reached the vicinity of Leeton in the Tennessee Valley October 29th. Stewart's and Cheatham's corps were then in front of Decatur. On the night of the 29th, I received orders to cross the Tennessee River at Florence. So Lee has with him, he has Major General Edward Johnson. He has Major General Carter L. Stevenson. And he has Henry Clayton, Major General Henry Clayton. These are his 3 division leaders. And as they come down through here, they're going to make a movement toward the river. Just prior to that, Stewart and Cheatham are coming and making their way. And it's right around this time that Hood writes to Jefferson Davis to ask him to give him, was it Lieutenant General, Major General, some kind of a higher rank, because he was taking over Hardee's corps, and so Hardee's corps, and he'd already been in charge of it for a while. I just noticed that the other night. So there's two things here that takes place. They're going to take off. Sharp is going to take off to Bainbridge area, and Brigadier General Randall L. Gibson is going to head toward Florence. And they're going to make their way across the river into what is now Lauderdale County. That was Lauderdale County then too. I don't know why I said that. So this is Sunday, October 30th. I want you to note that Sundays is important for them because all the big moves are on Sundays, okay? I'm assuming they don't like church. You ever wonder why, the president wants to speak? It's going to be on Wednesday night while I'm trying to get people at church. Or Sunday night or something of that nature. This is a picture that was drawn. At the bottom, you can see a little better than you can at the top. But at the bottom is the old burnout bridge that they talk about, which is the same bridge that you're going to hear on Sunday here. Except at this time it had been burned. I've had a lot of people tell me that the Confederates are not, that the Union burned it. Matter of fact, even some of the reports that you read in some of the documents and stuff, they'll say that the Union burned it. But the Union did not burn it. The Confederates burned it. And it was given orders from Corinth to a guy that was related to the President of the United States by marriage. Anyway, so they burned it in 1862, just as the Union soldiers were getting close to that area. They weren't right on them, but they were getting close, and so they burned the bridge. I think this is an interesting drawing. So as they're going to go across the river, they don't have a pontoon bridge yet, so they have the pontoon boats. And these boats are going to be filled with guys that are going to go across the river, and as they go across the river, they're going to make their way to the island. You see that island, Patton's Island. And you'll see that there's artillery on the south side of the river. This is the artillery I was telling you about a while ago. They are going to be firing across on the north side towards Todd's Hill, and they're going to be firing over there to help the soldiers that are taken across the river in the boats. Here's kind of what it would have looked like, although it wouldn't have been modernized and all this. There wouldn't have been as many trees as you see here. That's something that might fascinate me. You know why there wasn't as many trees? Because they burned them. Firewood. Yep. Cooking, all of that. So the city of Florence passed an ordinance that they were going to plant these trees all around Florence called shade trees. And nobody was allowed to cut a branch off one of those trees. So that's the reason why I tell you there wasn't as many trees there as there is now. Todd's Hill is, Levi Todd owned a house up on the hill here. It's called Mapleton. Okay? Yeah. And his name was Levi Todd. He is supposedly kin to Abraham Lincoln's wife, the Todds, Mary Todd. And he owned that. By the time the war was being fought, nobody was living in it. It was empty at the time. And so there was different Union and Confederates, I'm sure both of them used it at some point in time or another. But that whole hill got known as Todd's Hill. Later on, a guy named James McFarland bought it, or Robert McFarland bought it, and had all the land down there in the bottoms, and that's where we get McFarland Bottoms today. He also fought in the Civil War, and he's buried in the Florence Cemetery. There's Patton Island. There's the old railroad bridge. This is looking at where Gregg and I, a few others, think that this is where they launched the pontoon bridge, was from here. So this would have been the same area. We believe it's in this area that they would have left on the boats. So we see them attacking across the river, and they headed straight to the island, and then turned left, going downriver, and turned back right, and headed up what we're calling Todd's Hill. They would have headed up somewhere in the vicinity of possibly where if they decided to go around the right side of the Indian Mound, and I don't know that they did. They may have went around the left side. The railroad track would have still been up through that direction. So I don't know exactly how they went up through there, but they would have went up this hill here. And as they were going up this hill, they were attacking anybody that they could find that wasn't running. But the only major event that takes place through here is this guy right here, Andrew DeVilbiss. I can tell you something about this guy. He was a writer. He was a poet. He was well liked by the men that he was with. He's the only one that gets killed in this little episode of them taking Florence. The Union soldiers were trying to get out of there. I don't blame them. If somebody was shooting a cannon at me, I would probably go a different direction also. But the problem is these guys are not supposed to be getting hit by any cannons. And some shrapnel off of one of the cannons hits him and kills him. We have the letter, or a copy of the letter, that they sent to his wife to let her know that he had died. It wasn't, it's been since I've been living here, since the 70s, that they erected this monument here, this tombstone. They did not know where he was buried for sure. And so the family figured out where it was that he was buried, and they came here and put this tombstone up. And that's about all I know about that. It's when Bill McDonald was still alive, way before that. So they get into town, and this is a big celebration. Women are coming out. And starting to get dark now, okay? And women are coming out, and they're celebrating, and this is just a wonderful evening. The Confederates are here, the Yankees are gone, and this is just everything's going to be great. But the problem of it was the town of Florence was not a great place to live at that time for anybody because they had lost so much. Now you think about this just a second. They have the river, they have the railroad, and they have the roads. Military road going to Nashville, Huntsville Road going through. They haven't been taken care of in a couple of years. No going out and fixing the roads. The railroad is gone. So the only thing they had left really was the river, but the Union Navy was not letting any boats go up and down the river like they had prior. So you're not getting all those supplies. So how did they get any supplies? Well, every now and then, there would be somebody who'd take a wagon and they'd head up north. Sometimes they'd go to Corinth, but they would head up north. They'd go to Nashville, Columbia, sometimes Pulaski, and get whatever they could get and bring it back to Florence and distribute it to people that needed it. You can imagine it wasn't all that much. But we see this in the letters in the Southern Claims records. It talks about them going. This one lady went to Corinth, and so this happened several times during the war. So when they got there, they had a big party, but it didn't last long. Although they still kept trying to treat them to the best that they could, and even the soldiers began to say, "Hey, we know that they really care and they're trying, but they really don't have the substance to give like they would like to." All right, so we're now looking at what happened on the other end, down toward Bainbridge. And so they chose not to cross there at Bainbridge. There's a whole lot of stuff I can tell you, but if I tell you every little bitty thing, we'll be here all night. And I don't want to be here all night. So they come across at kind of an angle, going across the river. Of course, the Union are watching Bainbridge, and that's part of the reason. And this was Edward Johnson, who's taking his troops across through here. Do you see this right here? That small gap there? That's Bainbridge. That's where the Bainbridge Ferry was located, right there. And you can see the reason why they would have a ferry there, because it's not far across there. So they would have gone, there's the Bainbridge Ferry. They would have gone this direction over closer to what we think of Veterans Park area. Now, I've got a whole lot of notes up here, and I have no idea where I am with them, so I'm not going to worry about them. So Highway 72, or Florence Boulevard, it comes down through like this here, did not do that at that time. And, of course, there was no Cox Creek Parkway either. So they come up the Huntsville Road, and they have a skirmish there, and they chase the Union back. And this is around that area. where this took place. And they talk about Posey's farm. And you could see on this map, all that's marked in orange there, that's Posey's property. Now, if you look, oh, this is better. Matthew Wilson's property is at the top. Rice and Ripe Foundries over to the left in the corner. This is Sidney Cherry Posey's property in the orange, and Robert M. Patton's property, what we call the Sweetwater property, is right below his. So when you're going down 72 or Florence Boulevard, and you get to Cox Creek Parkway, and then through there, you're crossing in, after you cross there, you're crossing into, I think it's easier to do it this way. You're crossing right here in from Posey's property down here to Patton's property. I want you to notice how far he owns. This is all the way down to the river, or close to the river here. Now, I've had some people that said he owned all the way to the river. I can't find that unless it was something in Cypress Land Company. I can't find that, but I did the research on this and was able to find this. Also, Posey, supposedly his home was right in here, which is on the, what's that park called? Dibert Park. So it would have been right here, but I think that he had some slave quarters down in here, and possibly maybe an overseer's house in that area. Near the yellow line. Yeah, near the yellow line right here. Now, this is the area that we're talking about because, Greg, I don't remember what it was that you found the other day that talked about Posey's farm. Yeah. Was it in Hyde's papers? Yeah. Okay. And this is Sidney Posey here. Posey was one of the two men that in 1860, in December, voted not to secede from they were elected, in December, not to secede from the Union. They went to Montgomery in 61, voted against seceding from the Union. Posey wouldn't sign it. But don't let anybody fool you. They were not saying that they not going to completely secede from the Union. What they were saying was, we're not going to secede as a state from the Union. They were called cooperationists. And that meant, let's get all the southern states together. We'll make our argument against the Union. And if we decide that they're not going to follow what we want, we'll all pull out together. So when you hear people say that Lauderdale County voted not to secede from the Union, make sure you understand they voted not to secede from the Union as a state. Okay? Got any questions on that? Because I hear that over and over and over that, it's the first thing I thought, well, isn't that neat? Well, they didn't even vote. They were totally against secession. They weren't going to, and that's not exactly what happened at all. They were afraid that Alabama would secede and nobody else would. Or maybe Alabama would secede and South Carolina secede, but and we'd be isolated right here. That's what they feared. And I think they thought, like Posey, I think he thought that if they could get them all together and they would show the Union how strong that we are and that we're not going to put up with this and this is what we're going to do, that maybe they would back down. The Union would back down and slavery would not be a problem. Now, one of the things I do want to say to you all, and I think this is important, I'm from Indiana, okay? And so I know I'm classified as a Yankee, but I was 19 when I came here, and I'll be 66 next month. So I think I've lived here long enough to understand how people in the South think. So when it comes to this whole issue of what's taken place, by this time in 1864, most of the slaves that had been on plantations were either just living there and trying to survive at Brooks, the only Brooks that lived in Lauderdale County at the time. Brooks High School is named after. his wife, he was in the service and his wife was at home during this time. His wife was at home and she's got these slaves. She can't feed them. Okay? She ain't got no income coming in. So you know what she did? She would give them, not deed them, but give them certain areas of the property and say, you farm it. And what the proceeds that come off of that, you'll give me a certain percentage of it and you have the rest. And that's the reason why in the Southern Land Claims or Southern Claims records, you'll find black people that owned horses and they want their money back from the horse that the Union Army took from them or cavalry took from them. So that's what was taking place. What would we call that? Sharecropping. So before the war was over, they were already doing that here locally. And I think they might have been better off if they had started out that direction, and maybe we wouldn't have been in a war. But nevertheless, that was history. We can't go back and undo anything. But we can learn from it. And by the way, some of my family owned them too, so most northern people has ancestors from the south. General Stanley shows up in Athens on October 31st. October 31st at Cherokee Station, John Bell Hood is there. And while he's there, headquarters, Tuscumbia, October 31st, 1864, Honorable J.A. Shedden, the Secretary of War, Hood's writing him a letter. And Florence is in our possession, and the pontoon bridge is being laid down. I hope to be able to advance across the river so soon as supplies are obtained or can be obtained. He also writes to the superintendent of the Mobile and Ohio Railroad, and he says, I must have 20 days' supply of rations for this army at Cherokee with the least possible delay. Please give me all the assistance you can in transporting them to that point and allow the trains from your road to run direct to Cherokee Station, which will avoid transshipment at Corinth. Time is of the utmost importance. This is October the 31st. Then another letter was written by John Bell Hood to a Whitfield, who's a quartermaster at Meridian, Mississippi. Give me all the aid you can in transporting 20 days' supply of rations for this army to Cherokee Station at once. Time is all important. I have asked of the Mobile and Ohio Railroad to allow their trains to run direct to Cherokee to avoid reshipment at Corinth. The remainder of Johnson's and Clayton's divisions were crossed on the night of the 30th, and on the morning of the 31st, Stevenson's division was crossed on November 2nd. On November 1st, Hood orders Jackson, General William H. Jackson, and he orders him to go to Decatur and put up somewhat of a front as if that they might be taking it again or trying to. And what he's trying to get happen is he's afraid, and he's gotten word that the Union may be backing out of Decatur and going north. He didn't want them doing that. So he's sending Jackson there to try to get them to stay in Decatur. Now, the other thing he tells him to do is he wants him to hold the enemy close in at Decatur, observe the river as far down as Bainbridge Crossing as the command of Brigadier General Roddy is ordered to move. Jackson has two brigade commanders with him, Lawrence S. Ross and Frank C. Armstrong. You may be familiar with them. So the pontoon bridge is put in. It's going to be placed about like that. The bridge is to the island, and then they construct, what would you call that? Trestle across there into Lauderdale County. This is where I was standing at the point of where we think that the pontoon bridge started to go across. This is the road coming down that's there now, a path down to the spot on the river. This is looking back on the bank, and this is from the river bridge looking at that. That's the spot I was standing on, and this the view of it looking across the river at Patton Island. One of the things I found interesting, they are starting to build some defenses, and Lee has ordered the house will have to come down if it's in the way of one of the readouts. So it didn't make any difference. This is what needed to be, this had to be moved so that they could build these. Well, the union didn't like it, and they decided they're going to do something about it. Pontoon bridge, this is November the 2nd. Croxton said, I'll try to cut their pontoons tonight. Thursday the 3rd, my force is scattered from the mouth of Elk River to this point, and thence to Baugh's factory, and is so scattered that a small cavalry force would make it necessary for me to concentrate and thus abandon portion of the road I'm watching. Respectfully, John T. Croxton. That was November 3rd. Part of the Army occupies Florence, but want of supplies and bad weather have delayed forward movement, which will be resumed as soon as practicable. Now, you see in this theme here, we got to have supplies. We got to have them. And they're needing 20 days of supplies, and I think that was on, what was that, the 31st? And they're there 23 days. Yeah, and so they're going to need that. They don't get that. Okay, the whole time they're there, they're having to live off of whatever they already have and what anybody else has while they're there. November 4th, upon inspection of an officer of our department and one of General Hood's inspectors, it was found that 360 artillery horses would be required to supply the places of those broken down and that could not move. No horses being in reserve, they have put 240 mules received from Paxton in the gun carriages in place of horses. The remainder will, I suppose, be taken from the different wagon trains unless it is determined to leave some of the artillery at this point. I think we may safely say that 1,500 animals have been utterly used up on this march, and the number will be doubled if we make as hurried a trip into Tennessee as it is expected we will. So now they don't have supplies, and their animals are wore back out. So on November 4th, William Austin Smith writes of the 48th Tennessee, he says, 5 Yanks came down to the island and tried to cut our pontoons, but failed. Now, 8 Yankees procured a skiff several miles above us, and at nightfall descended the river for the purpose of severing the bridge. On their way down, they pressed a Mr. Ransom Peden, a good and substantial success, into their service as a guide. Now, do you see that this line over here in what I would call the canal side of the river? It's actually the smaller side of the river. Y'all see what I'm talking about, that blue arrow? That's where he took them down. Now, there's no pontoon bridge there. And he knew that. And so that's what he said. He was a good success. Well, he proved to be a good success. Then we have the fight at Shoal Creek on November 5th, 1864. Friday, November 4th, headquarters, Lee's Corps, Major General Clayton, commanding divisions, General Lee directs me to say that Johnson and Stevenson's divisions will move tomorrow as far as Shoal Creek on the Huntsville Road, and that you will be left in charge of the town and its vicinity. He desires you to send a brigade at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning to relieve the brigade from Johnson's division on picket on the Nashville Road, that'd be out in, like going toward Happy Holler, and to continue the works around town. I am General, very respectfully, your obedient servant, J.W. Ratchford, Assistant Adjutant General. The cavalry, Union Cavalry, come out and they kind of meet right at about the same place that we were talking about earlier on the Posey's place. And they, of course, turn around and head back across Shoal Creek. Croxton's got his brigade there, and showing you what it looks looking west. Understand, I gave this lecture in Nashville, and most of those people didn't know what it looked like over there. So if you're wondering why I'm telling you this is what it looks like and you live here, this is the reason why, okay? So so Croxton's on one side, and Johnson Stevenson, they send a group of Sharp's brigade and Dee's brigade down here and cross the old canal down here at the bottom, and they're making their way up, and Croxton begins to see this, and they try to fire on him, and this is looking east at 4 Mile Creek, and they're overwhelmed. There's no way that they can stay there and take on a whole two divisions that was there, and he's got one brigade, and so they pretty much hurry up and get them cannons and move them and head down toward Center Star, and they talk about 4 Mile Creek, and they went and camped east of there.
That's confused with 4 Mile Branch.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that was 4 Mile Creek, because 4 Mile Branch is on the other side of the show.
Yeah, I was saying that for people to confuse it with 4 Mile Branch.
Yeah.
That's on the old Huntsville Road, which makes a curve that would be on the 17.
Right. That's right.
They had a skirmish. Hatch finally shows up with 2 brigades, Union, and he has a little, just kind of small skirmish. I don't even know if anybody got killed out there on November 6th, the day after the down at Killen. This is Sally Foster. Of course, Sally Foster, she begins to talk about her experience and her feelings about what's going on. She writes in her journal, and I think it's interesting to read what young people write and their perspectives about different things. And she said, I got acquainted with a number of generals, amongst them Generals Beauregard, Forrest, Lee, besides several others. Well, I cannot count other officers and privates. Lieutenant W. Forrest, the general's only child, Captain Macon, Captain Mason, a relative dear Maria, doctor's brothers, Major D. Cross, who used to be Sister Jenny's old lover, and Lieutenant Kendall, who wrote me a sweet piece in my album, and so many others, what I cannot recall all of their names. General Forrest, his wife, and son will stay at our house. So at the time that they were here, General Forrest, his wife, and son all stayed right there at Rogers Hall, what is now Rogers Hall. At that time, it was called Courtview. This is November 7th. November 8th, they had an election. And the election took place at Taylor Springs. You see it on the right of this map here. It's off of old Lexington Road. So this regiment, he says that General Hatch were struggling to prevent an advance of Hood, and as the regiments voted for Lincoln and Johnson, an occasional shell hissed over the ballot box, and the patter of bullets came up from the swamp. The brave Union boys took turns in voting and fighting. It's my opinion that this is a bigger story than what probably really happened. They were probably people out there fighting and shooting at one another. I don't know if they were shooting over the ballot box or not. Would you put a thing in the ballot box if he was shooting over it? I wouldn't. I'd move that box. Again, at the pontoon bridge on November 9th, to General S. Cooper, Adjutant Inspector General, movement into Middle Tennessee is still delayed by want of supplies, bad weather, and impassable roads. Hood wrote, the Honorable J.A. Seaton, heavy rains will delay the operations of this army for a few days. Another bold attempt to destroy our pontoon bridge. The night was intensely dark and a good deal of rain was falling. The guards on the duty of the bridge could scarcely see each other more than 5 steps apart. The Yankees made one pick with a hatchet upon the cable to which the boats are attached. The blow severed all the strands but one, and the guards heard the blow and darted to the cable before they could repeat the tick. There were 3 of them engaged in the undertaking. The guard captured them before they could get away. William Austin Smith said on the 10th, Cheatham's corps marched to south bank of the river but could not cross. The trestle work of the bridge was washing away so fast that we had to tear it up. Yankees cut the cable on our pontoon bridge. We caught 3 of the Yanks. So you can see all the difficulties that they were having, even with the bridge, without the aid of the Union attacks. Even the weather itself was giving them all kinds of problems. Orders having been issued to cross the river, this is Cheatham's corps, we commenced the movement, but the river having risen so as to necessitate the removal of the portion of the pontoon, the orders were revoked and our headquarters changed from Tuscumbia to Mr. Jackson's near the river. That would have been in South Florence, where we remained until Sunday morning, November 13th. I'm just going to tell this story real quick. Pillow had a little bit too much to drink and fell into this fountain and broke his arm while he was there. This is at the Sweetwater home. This is also a story. I'm going to just tell it to you real quick. There was a lady that was complaining because these soldiers, Confederate soldiers, were stealing her pigs. And so Pillow goes out to check on it, and he sees this guy with a pig, and he tells him to put the pig down, and the guy refuses to do it, and so he just pulled out his gun and shot him right there on the spot. As far as I know, that's the only one that he killed during the whole campaign, probably. November 12th, right to the president. The circumstance, high water, and the fact that I had to draw supplies from and through a department not under my command, involving delay in their reaching me, have retarded my operations. As soon as Forrest joins me, which will be in a few days, he's at Johnsonville, I shall be able to move forward without the assistance of Forrest Cavalry. Without the assistance of Forrest Cavalry, I cannot secure my wagon trains when across the river. You may rely upon my striking the enemy wherever a suitable opportunity presents, and that I will spare no efforts to make that opportunity. So our Army headquarters on the 13th were established at Florence on the north side of the Tennessee River at 10 a.m. Cheatham's corps with artillery wagon trains set across the river during the day and went into camp at Waynesboro Road. And the infantry passed through Florence with music and all the glory and all, and the trains did not finish crossing until late that night, owing to a break in the bridge. Our headquarters at Mrs. Lawrence's house, half a mile from Florence. That would be going up Wood Avenue out of Florence. Sam Watkins, if you ever watched Burns' Civil War, you probably saw him quoted a few times on there. He says, we marched from Decatur. He was from Columbia, Tennessee. We marched from Decatur to Florence. Here the pontoon bridges were nicely and beautifully stretched across the river. We walked over the floating bridge and soon found ourselves on the Tennessee side of Tennessee River. In driving a herd of cattle across the pontoon, the front one got stubborn, and the others, crowding up in one bulk, broke the line that held the pontoon and drowned many of the drove. We had beef for supper that night. That's my favorite line right there. A circular was presented on the 14th on application to John Coffey Simpson's CS depository at Mr. Martin Harkin's store, which was on the southeast corner of the square in Florence. The soldiers of this army can dispose of all old issue of Confederate notes, either for 4% bonds or new issues. Now understand, by this time, Florence had already began refusing Confederate money. General Armstrong was up around the Green Hill area, and he captured a guy named William Clemens, arrested him. He said, I found upon him passes to go through the enemy's lines at all times, and to be treated as a good and loyal citizen by all U.S. soldiers. I'm not going to read all this, but this is when Forrest shows up. He finally gets there on November 14th. I don't even think all of his troops are in town. I think he's got there. I think some of them may have still been across the river, but he's there and he's ready, and he gives them and tells them what all he's done and everything, and that he's ready to go. Earthworks, as I said, were built on the south side of the river, and there were some built on the north side of the river. This one here can still be seen, and you can go to it. This second dot to your right, farthest one on the right at the bottom, is where the earthworks are. The first one is where I was for the pontoon bridge. This is where I was at the earthworks. TVA property. This is one of the things I would like to see us try to accomplish, to see if they will allow us some way to be able to care for this place. Beauregard sent the following to General Samuel Cooper in Richmond, Virginia. Weather again bad and river still high. General Stewart's corps has not yet crossed, is constructing the defenses on the south side. That's November 15th. Protect the pontoon bridge, yeah. All right, this is Jackson and Ross having a conversation through a letter. Ross is under him. Here's what he's telling him. He says, I don't have anything to feed my horses. You got to get something to help me feed our horses, or they're not going to survive. I don't have them that's going to be able to pull any cannons or anything like that if I don't start feeding them. The 16th was a day of prayer and fasting. This is the Presbyterian church there in Florence that was built by the early founders of Florence. This is where Dr. Mitchell was arrested and sent north as a prisoner of war for praying for the Confederacy and Jefferson Davis while Union soldiers were sitting in there. Captain Thomas Key, standing in the cheering crowd as a band serenaded the newly arrival Forrest and his troops at Tuscumbia, made the unpleasant forecast. With Lincoln, the executive, we may now expect the war to continue for another term of 4 years, unless we shall be able to conquer the peace. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. It's on another occasion that they were marching by what is now the post office in Florence, was the female synodical school across from the Presbyterian church, and they were cheering and waving their handkerchiefs, and one man said, amid our enthusiastic responses, I heard that piping voice again saying, you're too late, gals. Chicken pie and waving your handkerchiefs got us into this thing. Now show us the way to get out. That's what we want to know. Now we come to a point in time where I'm getting really close to the end here, and we're on November the 18th, and this is out off of Butler Creek with the second Iowa and 9th Illinois Cavalry. Major Horton crossed Shoal Creek at Cowpen Ford, which is Goose Shoals. There it is, at Goose Shoals. Ford it was also known as Cowpen Ford at times, because Cowpen Creek just comes out just south of there. And this I took from the bridge. So they could have crossed it right where the bridge is, but this is still the same location. When about midway between Shoal Creek and the road, you had to cross a main thoroughfare, Butler Creek, a road leading direct to the rebel camp, not more than 3 miles distant. At this road, he left the 9th Illinois to keep back any force the enemy should ascend in that direction until with the 2nd Iowa, he could complete the reconnaissance and return to that place. We had not moved far, however, before the report of the 9th Illinois Rifles told us that Harper could not hold this post in peace. Soon an orderly came from Harper informing Horton that the enemy were concentrating such a force at that point that he should be forced to yield the road to them. Upon the reception of this news, Horton ordered Harper to fall back and the most practicable route recross the creek, leaving him to get out as best as he could after completing his march to the Waynesboro Road. We now pressed rapidly forward until the desired point was reached and the requisite information obtained. This done, Major Horton directed his guide to take him to some ford further up the creek than the one at which Harper was expected to cross. As we had no train, the guide took us to an old disused ford, which this is that intersection. And this is who was where. Coon's up there. And he said the knowledge obtained, he found this, the knowledge obtained by Horton of the existence of the ford subsequently proved of great importance to our brigade. And on this date, Brigadier General Gideon J. Pillow at Florence requested that Lieutenant General R. Taylor to be made Major General. I don't know why I'm telling you that right at this point. Get this, that they have found this hidden ford, okay, and shown where it was. They think it was a former slave or something that may have shown them where this was. So when they come back up through here, what happens is Frank Armstrong is on one end of it. Buford's coming in on the side road up here. Crossland is already ahead of him. And Coon does the only thing possible he can do, and this is where this picture comes in, and he begins to move down toward this spot. As you can see the yellow lines, this is where they're moving back across these fields. This is the field when I took the picture from there. We won't go into who the character was this time. This is where they had to dig out to get their wagons down across so they could go across the ford. And at this spot, Lanny found at least one bullet. Did you find more than one, Lanny, or just that one?
This is on the, what we call the north side here, right? Yeah, the other side's
This is the west side.
I would call it the west side, yeah.
we up on the slope of the hill in that field. I found a complete Spencer Carvey book that, a couple of 58 calibers and some small round balls, and Hal found some fired ones, and I found a few fired ones too.
So what happens is, when they got to the edge of the creek, where the ford is, it was too steep to take the wagons down. So they're firing. They've got troopers firing at these Confederates that's coming across this field at them, as the others are digging in there and get it to where these wagons can get across the creek. And so that's a lot of the reason why some of these things are found out there. Stewart's Corps crossing the Tennessee River. Guess what day it was on? Sunday, November 20th. Captain Joseph Boyce, Sam French's division, Cockrell's Missouri Brigade, we were obliged to leave behind at Tuscumbia and Florence many men who were so badly shod and clothed they could not make the march toward Nashville. General Cheatham issued an order, this from Dr. Owen. General Cheatham issued an order for all barefooted men to sew them up shoes out of beef hides, put the hair next to the feet, and stitch them close around the feet. I saw several pairs of them, and they did fine to walk around in, but did not smell well after a day or two. November 21st, Hood gives a speech. You march today to redeem by your valor and your arms one of the fairest portions of our Confederacy. This can only be achieved by battle and by victory. Summon up in behalf of a consummation so glorious, all the elements of soldiership and all the instincts of manhood, and you will render the campaign before you full of auspice, fruit to your country, and lasting renown to yourselves. John Bell Hood. James Argyle Smith sticks around, and he is going to be in charge of meeting at Cheatham's Ferry and getting the supplies across the river there. Now, they have already left. And by the time that he gets to take the supplies and begin going north, during that trip, the Battle of Franklin's taking place. He gets to Nashville, and he finds out his commander is dead, and he is his replacement. Anybody tell me who that was? Claiborne.
Hey, David, I think one of the important things on that too is, you got a pontoon bridge up there, which should be real easy to take a pontoon truck and a supply train, just go down there and go up that way, right? Reason it goes this way is they never got the railroad fixed at this time. And so the easiest thing to do, that is going to be their supply route, is from Cherokee Station, as far as the railroad went, across Cheatham's Ferry by boat, up to Middle Tennessee. And so they pulled the pontoon bridge up. So all that stuff they built to protect it from cavalry raids was just a waste of time.
And Admiral Lee's squadron, which should have been, we think would have been down here.
Not yet.
Well, there's two
It was
problems.
up in Nashville.
Well, they're licking their wounds because they have just lost a bunch of their boats at Johnsonville. And they haven't got the Neosho to the Tennessee or Cumberland River yet. And in the rivers, the river's kind of low still. It's higher than what it was first off.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Of course, they left from here. If you ever read the book Embrace an Angry Wind, it gives you kind of pretty good picture of what it was like when they were leaving. It's sleeting, it's cold, the wind's blowing. There's several stories that we could tell during this period of time of one gentleman that talks about going up to what is now Happy Holler, and they're told they're building a bridge across the creek there, and they're told to stop building the bridge, and they come back, and he comes back down to the crossroads, and they head back up Butler Creek Road. And so we have those documents. We also have other documents where it just talks about it being so frigid and so cold as they were leaving and going through there. One of the things I think is important here, they're coming back. It is awful. Most of them don't have any shoes on. Even Union soldiers talk about the mud was so deep that once they put their foot in it, they pulled out their foot, there was no shoe. And so even half the Union soldiers didn't have any shoes on. It was terrible coming back. Forrest and his troops are probably the ones that saved them coming back. Another thing that saved them, and I meant to show you this at the beginning, I didn't, but there was a pontoon bridge at Decatur. The Union left that pontoon bridge at Decatur. Well, that came in handy because they were able to detach parts of that bridge and bring it down the river and build the pontoon bridge at Bainbridge. And that's what saved Hood's army. I mean, it's really what saved his army between Forrest and them getting that pontoon bridge down there. I'm going to end with this. This is what Miss Foster said. This is December 30th, 1865. The poor rebels went up into Tennessee and were defeated. I'm so disappointed, for I was sure they would be victorious, which they would have been had they only held their ground about 24 hours longer. They had infested Nashville and would have soon been in it, but Hood's army had been taught to retreat and fight and would not fight without running. It was the worst defeat our Army ever experienced, and I hope the last. Well, that's interesting words from a young girl that doesn't really know anything other than what she's overhearing from adults. And as you know, as well as I know, it wasn't that simple. Let's just stay 24 hours and this thing will be ours. It was not like that. All right, if anybody got any questions?